when we have stress, our body wants to produce more cortisol. Cortisol increases our weight around our abdomen, so hips.
Hi, folks. Unfortunately, I'm on my phone because I'm having a vacation on the far west coast of Vancouver Island at a little place called Tofino. I'm going surfing tomorrow, and there was a huge storm the other day. But it's epic here. It's so wild and beautiful. Anyways, I'm only on my phone. I can't see any of you, and I don't know whether Dr. Kimberley is to my left or my right, but I'm here with Dr. Kimberley and all of you today to go over one of the most complex connective systems in our body, and it's so full of jargon that Dr. Kimberley, who works for Mountain Trek and is our resident naturopathic doctor, and I are going to strip it down to talk about the most basic hormones so that we can understand what happens. First, we're going to talk about the different glands and the different hormones and what their functions are. Then we're going to talk about what happens to those when we go under acute stress, like a near-miss auto accident, or maybe 100,000 years ago, a saber-toothed tiger. And then we're going to go into what happens when acute stress stays up into chronic stress, which honestly is all of us. I would say that in the various 50 shades of gray, all of us in the Western world have elevated chronic stress to some degree or another. And it's putting some kind of imbalance into the rest of our hormones and how that affects our metabolism, how we burn or store sugar, how it affects our sex hormones. And all of those things are so complex and tied to our nervous system and our immune system and our digestive system that we wanted to shed some light today about that. And then lastly, Dr. Kimberley is going to give you a list of things that you can do that are practical, not only to work with day-to-day stress, which is elevated for all of us with cortisol or with COVID, but also some things that you might want to take, some herbal supplements that you might want to add into your digestive practices to just augment your system to help lower the effects of chronic cortisol elevation and support the thyroid and insulin and your sex hormones. So, Dr. Kimberley, could we start just talking about the adrenal glands and the pancreas and insulin and the thyroid? Those three sort of centers that sort of have a lot to do with all the rest of the systems of our body.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Kirkland. And hi, everyone. It's really great to be here for another call with all of you. As Kirkland has mentioned, this is such a broad topic, and I really want to keep it really practical for you. And so walking you through those few systems, you can really simplify it down into thinking of your adrenal glands as the glands that control your stress response. Your pancreas is going to control your blood sugar and digestion. And then your thyroid is really controlling your metabolism. And so the thing to know with all of those functions is that there's a lot of overlap, one between the functions, but then also between how all of those hormones interact. So even though we might think of stress as something that's only affecting the adrenal glands, what you'll learn through our seminar today is that there is so many widespread effects of something like stress on our metabolism, on things like having what our risk factor is for developing diabetes, what our digestion is like. And so going back to the adrenal glands, there's two main hormones that the adrenal glands produce. They produce more than that, but again, we want to keep things simple. And so the way in which those hormones are produced are going to depend on if your stress is acute or chronic. So I like to use the example of if you're at work and a coworker jumps out and scares you, which is more likely than a lion chasing you these days, that is going to cause your adrenaline to spike. If you're really having a problem with that coworker and they are jumping out and scaring you on the hour every day, then you're going to end up in more of a chronic stress situation. And then that is when not only is your adrenaline going up, but your cortisol is going up too. And so adrenaline and cortisol are hormones that are really helpful in the immediacy of the situation, so that you can react, so that you can get out of the situation. Let's say that's not a coworker jumping out at you, but you are on the street and we have somebody jumping out and threatening you. You need to get out of that situation, or that classic example of the lion chasing you. We need to get you out of that. So it affects a number of different processes in your body that enable you to run. So you're going to have the release of stored blood sugar. Your blood sugar is going to go up. Your body's going to be breaking down protein in your body so that you have fuel available to get you running away. It's going to suppress your digestion, your immune system, your reproductive function, because that's not in the priority. And so we see that right away. And then cortisol is basically an extension of that. So it's what your body starts to release cortisol when it's like, okay, there's a bigger problem here. We need to be on guard longer term. And so same kind of effects, but long-term issues. Moving over to the pancreas, I'm not going to go into as much detail on that, but basically what you need to know is that releases insulin. And so when you eat a meal and you get sugar, you get fuel from that food, the insulin is what is putting that away, because we don't want those levels to be too high. So if your stress is up and your blood sugar is up because your body's releasing all of this sugar, we need insulin to put that away when the stress is done. And then your thyroid is setting your metabolic rate. And what is important to know here in relation to stress is if you have chronic stress, this will slow your metabolic rate. And I can dive into that a little bit more as to how that makes sense. I think that we'll link into that afterwards, but those are the few glands and functions.
Can I ask a question, Kimberly?
Mm-hmm.
When I think of the thyroid, and it just sits behind our Adam's apple and our neck, right?
Yes.
And the adrenals, they're kind of like kidney-shaped beans sitting on top of our kidneys.
Yes, which are down in our back. So if you think right below your rib cage, down in your lower back.
Yeah. And if I go back to the thyroid, I always think of it as like a governor. Like you used to have old engines in the 70s, and they would have a thing that would adjust the throttle on how fast that engine would run, and it would allow it to go fast for a high metabolism or keep it low for like an ongoing running for a long period of time. So does the thyroid rev when we need to outrun that coworker that's jumping out at us? And so when the cortisol dumps and we get the insulin taking blood sugar to our thighs, we also kickstart the thyroid, or does the thyroid get turned off so that this whole cortisol thing even goes beyond what the thyroid's supposed to control?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So initially, usually what happens with that initial adrenaline spike is that your thyroid can also rev up. This doesn't happen for everybody, but that's the most classic picture. So it's helping to get that metabolism revving, get your energy up, get you energized so that you can, again, get yourself out of the situation is the primary goal with that. What happens when we enter into the chronic stress situation, which really is where we all are at.
Mm-hmm.
There's very few people who are, only have an adrenaline response to stress, because most of us we're really already in that chronic stress response. In that scenario, it is not helping our thyroid function. So it's our body, and the effect of all of these different hormone interactions is that our metabolic rate is lower, our thyroid hormone production is lower, and also the effects of the thyroid hormone that we are producing, it's less able to have those desirable actions. So it affects the receptors, it affects a whole number of things in our body, but evolutionary, or basically why that would happen, what is the benefit of that? With chronic stress, looking back in history, it usually was more in time of famine or when our body needed to conserve resources. So that's why that still happens to us now, even though it's not all that helpful anymore.
So if our thyroid isn't functioning optimally, and it's sort of revving down and revving low, but yet we're taking in enough food and digesting it and turning it into blood sugar, we've got enough energy in the gas tank, and perhaps even more than enough. the insulin has to take that blood sugar to either muscles or brain or to a fat cell, but our metabolism is kind of kept down low. Does that contribute to us actually storing more of that blood sugar in our fat cells then?
Yes, yes, so it definitely can. So for a number of reasons, you can think of yourself as being in storage mode when you are in stress. So the cumulative effects of all of these hormones is that it's really, really difficult to burn fat and to burn fuel stores unless it's in that time of escape. So our body's hanging on and lowering that metabolic rate, and so, even if you're working on proper meal timing and doing a lot of the things that are supportive for that thyroid function, the effects of stress definitely play into that picture and can work backwards with what we're going for there.
And if I think of, say, insulin
Hmm.
as a messenger or even a thyroid hormone, does the insulin take the blood sugar to a cell, a receptor in the cell for it, and then kind of does the lock and key, and then the cell opens the membrane and lets the blood sugar in and uses it for energy? What actually causes insulin resistance? If we're in a chronic stress situation, that definitely all research is showing it leads to insulin resistance.
Yeah. And so actually there's a big connection there with inflammation. So when we're in
Mhm.
stress, what a lot of us don't stop to think about is that one of the ways in which our body is adapting to the stress is it actually causes the release of something called inflammatory cytokines. Basically, it's these little chemical messengers that increase inflammation. And so again, in the immediate stress response, or when things are spanning maybe a few weeks at most, these are all things that are or adaptations that are really supportive. But in the long run, when we're dealing with stress for months or years, we end up in this heightened or increased state of chronic inflammation. And there are many things in our day to day on top of stress that are going to feed into that inflammatory cascade, is what they call it, really, but this inflammatory response. And so, when we look at other things that are going on in our life, like what we're eating for food, if we're having a lot of processed, refined carbohydrates, anything that's spiking our blood sugar, having our blood sugar too high, and that insulin response in and of itself is causing inflammation. So we get this kind of like the chicken and the egg effect, where
Mhm.
what came first, because now we have um, stress causing inflammation, which decreases how well our insulin responds and is
Yes.
signaling, which causes more a higher increase in our blood sugar, which causes more inflammation. And people can get into these cycles basically that are challenging to shift out of. And this is where I see a lot of patients who are really struggling, feeling like they've got this chronically low energy, feeling a lot of pain, really struggling with weight loss, maybe having depression, because all of these things really are tied to inflammation, but not feeling like any of their efforts in any individual area is making enough shift until we look at the whole picture.
And if it goes chronically, where the receptor site for insulin on the cell keeps saying no, because say we're working sitting down at a computer all the time, we're not needing to burn that energy that's in our system, um, that leads to type 2 diabetes ultimately, doesn't it?
Yes. So the further along we go with insulin resistance, so at first it begins with your blood sugar still totally within a normal range. And it's something that's actually not tested for very often conventionally, but I do look at a lot with my patients is testing a fasting insulin even with normal blood sugar. And we can see it creeping up way before we ever see any changes in blood sugar. So I take that as a warning sign. But if we don't do anything, if we don't step in and make dietary changes, bring in some herbs that can help, adjust meal timing, look at stress, then eventually many people who take it long enough and you end up in that state of type 2 diabetes.
Can I switch over to the immune system for a moment? Because some of the reading
Mhm.
I've been doing, when we're in a chronic state of adrenal output, both adrenaline and cortisol, or let's go back to the acute state. what I understand is if I'm about to go into a car accident or a bear's about to maul me, my immune system actually gets spiked in that acute situation too, so that if I get torn open or cut or something, my immune system is super active to make sure I don't get infected. But
Mm-hmm.
if that stays up continuously in a day after day kind of chronic state, with an elevated immune system, eventually it will become autoimmune. Can you just explain how that happens and what the negative effects of that autoimmune state could be? Because that can lead to certain autoimmunes like Hashimoto's, which again relates to the thyroid. Is that correct?
Yes, definitely. So there's a cortisol basically is a big player in regards to controlling our immune system. And the way, again, in which most people see the effects of it is really with immune suppression. So what happens when that, that colleague keeps scaring you initially is that it's not having a huge impact. It's not having a long-term impact on your immune system. But then when we get into that high cortisol, long-term chronic stress, it's really suppressing our immune system against things like viruses, bacteria. And I see people affected by this in different ways. So for some people, it manifests or presents as them always being sick. It seems that their immune system's not kind of proactively in the earlier stages fighting the virus, let's say, and they seem to be getting a cold or a flu 6 times a year, which is a lot. And then some people I see, though, that they don't get any of those more acute illnesses. They're not getting the colds and they're not getting the flus. And they can go for years like that. But then we see the onset of autoimmune disease. So their immune system's been working, but it's basically having reactivity against yourself. And so there's a number of different autoimmune diseases. Often I realized early on in practice when I ask people on their intake forms if they have family history of autoimmune disease, a lot of people actually don't know what that is. And so you might be wondering, like, what are the autoimmune diseases? And that can include, as Kirkland had mentioned, hypothyroidism. So a lot of people don't actually realize that the most common form of hypothyroidism, especially in women, is something called Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is autoimmune or an autoimmune response against your thyroid. There's also Graves' disease, which is that Graves' disease causes elevated thyroid function, so a really high metabolic rate initially, and then low thyroid function later. And then Hashimoto's causes low thyroid function. So that's really, really common. Actually, about 4% of the population has thyroid disease of some type. And I think that number is actually higher because it's one of those things that's often missed. But there's other autoimmune diseases as well, from things like celiac disease, type 1 diabetes, inflammatory bowel issues. So there's lots of other things that can come up too.
Even allergies to some degree, right?
Totally. Yep. If we have that chronic stress, and autoimmune type of reactivity, allergies can come into play. I also see certain skin conditions like eczema, for example. A lot of people really notice a very strong link to how stressed they are and whether or not they're having kind of active issues with that.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we could just take a little pause here right now and just see if any questions have come in, especially if people want to throw a question through to that, then Alex can bring it forward to Dr. Kimberley.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've got one question in the thread. What are the symptoms of an enlarged thyroid, aside from possibly being visible on the throat? And what are the effects if it's left untreated?
So it depends on what's going on. So we don't always necessarily get an enlarged thyroid, although that is a common symptom or presentation that can come up with any type of thyroid disease. So sometimes I have people who are experiencing thyroid issues and they feel like they've got this kind of heaviness or tenderness in their neck. And if you feel right in here, this is where the thyroid is. As Kirkland said, if you're male, it's right below your Adam's apple, but otherwise for women, it's a couple inches up above your sternum there. But the symptom presentation outside of that is really going to depend on if that inflammation is causing high thyroid function or low. So with low, which is more common, fatigue is really common, dry skin, hair loss, weight gain, constipation, depression, feeling cold all the time. Those are all
High
really
stress affects
common
your
things.
metabolism.
And then if it's rubbing too high, we can see more anxiety, irritability, insomnia, weight loss, tremor or shaking, elevated body temperature, more sweating, things from that standpoint. And the thing is, it can shift. There can be changes, and there's things outside of what I mentioned here. There's thyroid nodules and thyroid cancers and a number of other conditions that can affect it. But I think I saw a question come through too, is if I can repeat the name, and I think that's probably Hashimoto's that they are looking for. I'll say it one more time because it is a long word. Hashimoto's thyroiditis is the autoimmune condition that causes low thyroid function, and then there's Graves' disease, which usually initially at least causes elevated thyroid function, which I see a lot, way less often. So Hashimoto's is a lot more common.
And it seems to become common for a higher percentage of women midlife. Is that not true, Kimberly?
Yes, it does. And with that, a lot of things actually, to link in on a broader standpoint, become more common for women, especially in those perimenopausal years. So when you're leading up to menopause, and kind of around the years when periods start to shift, there is a lot of interplay in all of these hormones that I've been talking about. And stress really is something that we want to watch. And I mean, at the end of the day, we really can't control per se a lot of the stressors that come into our life. We can only control what we're doing about them, how we're managing stress, what our self-care regime looks like. We have limited control, but there's a lot of things we can do from that side of things. But the links there to walk people through a bit of that. So for women especially, when we have stress, our body wants to produce more cortisol. Cortisol increases our weight around our abdomen, so hips and abdomen, getting higher levels of that visceral fat, so fat around your organs. And so this part is actually also true for men. Men, you'll also have this pattern. And what that fat does is it's very hormonally active. So it will convert testosterone and other hormones into estrogen. And then that estrogen, again, for both men and for women, it can interfere with thyroid function. And for women, it also contributes to a lot of those symptoms that we start getting more perimenopausally. So heavier bleeds, fibroids, irritability, bloating, even things like gallstones can be coming into play because of elevated estrogen levels. And then at the same time, that demand for cortisol is stealing our progesterone. So our body will steal progesterone to make more cortisol. And really for women, at the end of the day, if we really simplify our hormone balance, it's about the balance between estrogen and progesterone. So whether estrogen's too high, progesterone's too low, we run into trouble, and the effects of stress are causing that divide to widen. So looking at the health of the adrenal glands and bringing in some of the herbs, adaptogens, and stress management things that I'll talk about later on are incredibly important around that period of time, because also after menopause, your ovaries are no longer producing estrogen and progesterone, and your adrenal glands need to take over that job. They will never keep up quite to the same extent, but if they're already really taxed by stress, then we're getting a lot lower hormone production.
It is, doesn't it? I've also read research, Dr. Kimberley, that if that gap between balance for estrogen and progesterone gets too large, that's often a precursor for breast cancer or uterine cancer. So those are super important things to keep an eye on. Is that correct?
Definitely. And another thing that the vast majority of women don't realize is estrogen is not actually one hormone. There's actually 3 different hormones that fit into the estrogen category. And the distribution, so whether your body makes some stronger, more inflammatory estrogens, or the weaker, healthier, more balanced estrogen, plays a lot into that risk factor kind of profile too, as well as how your liver is metabolizing and detoxifying estrogen. And a lot plays into that.
I'm wondering right now, we're almost at the half hour, whether you could talk about some things that both women and men might be able to do to not only, balance the stress in the day-to-day, the chronic stress, but also what kind of supplements could be supportive in the diet, or so much has to do with gut health as well for the other hormones that we need, like the neurotransmitters, serotonin, and others. That if there's some things there that could be practical, we could share in the next 5 or so minutes, that would be awesome.
Yes, definitely. So first of all, I mean, touching on the lifestyle piece, and then we'll talk on the supplement side of things. But there are so many things that we can do from a lifestyle side of things, which are often, unfortunately, the things that we all crowd out when life gets busy or more stressful. And so sleep being one of those. During sleep, our body ideally, that's when our cortisol should be lowest. And so making sure you're allotting time and trying to get good quality sleep is helpful. Of course, alcohol is one of those things we also tend to go to when we're stressed, which in the short term makes it feel like it's helping because it's a depressant and it's kind of lowering our guard with the stress, but it does affect things like sleep quality, and so also spikes cortisol in the long run. So trying to maybe trade some of those nights that you're having the glass of wine after work for getting out for a walk, exercising. More low to moderate intensity exercise can be really beneficial for helping to burn through cortisol versus some of the higher intensity, let's say more CrossFit style workouts can actually increase cortisol. So figuring out what works for you. In regards to supplements, as I mentioned before, there's a category of herbs referred to as adaptogens. And so these are herbs that help our resilience to stress. And so it helps our body to, again, basically cope with the effects of stress. There are a lot of different herbs that fit into this category, but some of the more balancing ones that are generally safer for people to take are herbs like rhodiola, or rose root is another name for that. And it can also be a bit more kind of uplifting and help with mood and things from that standpoint. Ashwagandha is an Ayurvedic herb, so from India, and that is one that's very balancing as well, that can help, again, with supporting the resilience to stress, but then also kind of managing that cortisol pattern. Cortisol release. Ashwagandha.
Ashwagandha.
Yeah.
How do you spell that?
Yeah, I can type it. I think I can type into the comments. I will type it in here. Ashwagandha. There we go.
Okay, good.
And then the other one was rhodiola, so I've got that there too. And then another one is Siberian ginseng. There's a lot of different types of ginseng. This one is called Eleuthero. So that's there. I do recommend, though, with supplements, especially, when we're bringing in herbs and things from this standpoint, what's useful for one person definitely may not be useful for everyone. And there can be contraindications depending on what kind of medications and things that you're on. So I do suggest that you touch base with your naturopathic doctor or doctor and find out if there's any interactions or anything to watch for, especially when we're looking at some, like, for example, licorice is a herb that's used quite often in a lot of the adrenal support formulas. If you have high blood pressure or if you're on a number of different medications, that can be more dangerous. It can cause elevations in your blood pressure. So again, they can be basically really potent, which is great because they can work really well and we can get a lot of benefit from them, but you just want to make sure it's well suited to you. Also with adrenal support formulas, again, most of the patients I work with, when I first start working with them, they assume that they are high cortisol. I do a lot of hormone testing in my practice, and I actually find that a lot of people are low cortisol. So we've been in this chronic stress response for so long that it's like our reserves are tapped out. So our body's not putting out that same amount of cortisol. And in fact, we are high adrenaline. So we're kind of on that running on empty type of feel. So that tired but wired. And there's opportunity to optimize things differently depending on where you fit in that spectrum. Other things that can be beneficial from a supplement standpoint, again, in general, are things like B vitamins. So our body tends to burn through more B vitamins when we are stressed, especially vitamin B5, which is also called pantothenic acid, but B5 is a lot easier to remember. So that can be helpful, and things like vitamin C as well. So our adrenal glands also use a lot of vitamin C, and that can be helpful for the immune response. And magnesium. I use a lot of magnesium bisglycinate in my practice, which is a form of magnesium that is more calming and supportive to the nervous system. So for a lot of patients that I work with, I'll have them taking magnesium before bed, which can help with their sleep, help with kind of balancing that cortisol piece. So, so a few different things there. But again, I don't want to make you think that supplements are the only way to be supporting your stress response. And breathing is actually one of the most potent, powerful things that you can do that can really help to lower your cortisol, lower your adrenaline, and shift from that fight or flight response into the rest or rest and digest. So it's something great to do before meals. And I'd love to take everyone on the call just through a really quick breathing exercise so that you can feel the effects yourself and see how quickly you can do that. So I'll get everyone, while you're sitting here, we're just going to take 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds, and just focus on our breath. So if you put one hand on your chest, I like to put my left hand on my chest so it's on top of your heart, and then put your right hand on your abdomen. So you can't quite see that for me here, but you want to put it right on your belly, because when you're inhaling, you want to expand and breathe right into your belly. So you want to feel that hand go out. And so what I'm going to count you through is we're going to inhale for 4, we're going to hold for 2, we're going to exhale for 6, and hold for 2, and then do it again. So close your eyes and inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Right into your belly. Hold 1, 2. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold 1, 2, and last round right into your belly. 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, you can keep breathing, but I hope some of you noticed that shift. I would love for you to let me know in the comments. It was only 3 breath cycles, and usually it takes 1 or 2 to kind of get into the swing of things. But whenever I do that, it can just be as simple as 3 breath cycles once you're in tune with it, and it really can drive a big impact. And so there's a lot of scientific research around that. Deep breathing activates the vagus nerve, which is part of the parasympathetic nervous system. It is that rest and digest nerve. And so with it being a rest and digest, again, that's why I mentioned before meals, doing that helps to get you out of that stress hormone state, and it enables your body to better digest food. I am going to just put the count in the comments. So it's 4, 2, 6, 2. So easy to remember. You want the longer exhalation because that's what is shown to really activate that vagus nerve. And what form of magnesium? Somebody asked. Magnesium bisglycinate, which I typed in as well.
I want to echo the fact, just going in and getting supplements and taking them off the counter, or reading an article and going in buying supplements, or doing a fast or a cleanse, just buying kits off the shelf is not very smart. Basically, it's using chemistry, which is in these plants, to do certain functions in our bodies, and we should be doing that with a professional. And that professional should know what medications we're on, what age we're at, and what hormone balancings we have. So all of these things need to be done basically scientifically. And one of the things I appreciate about you, Dr. Kimberley, is you have a science degree background, you're a full doctor in naturopathic medicine, and that you take a very scientific approach. And I believe in that as well. So if any of you aren't working with a naturopathic doctor right now to help ensure these questions that we all have to have about whether this is the right choice for me, my body, my age, my metabolism, then you could reach out to Dr. Kimberley. And certain states in America don't allow Canadian naturopaths to practice, but at least Dr. Kimberley can give you some ideas and maybe even point you in the direction of where to look up a naturopathic doctor in the city that you're in. But she's a resource, she's on our team, and it's worth connecting with her. I've used her myself for my own adrenal support system, and I totally believe in being guided through a complex body, which we're all in. It's not something you can just pop a pill in and everything's going to be fixed.
Definitely. Thank you, Kirkland. I really appreciate that. And what I'm doing, I'm just putting in the email. It'll go to my assistant, Katie. So if anyone is wondering about working with me personally, we can help to figure out if that's an approach that we can take with you, depending on where you are and what your goals are. And then I'm also putting my main website. I've got a lot of additional resources online and some online programs and things from that standpoint too. So a lot of blog posts, recipes, online programs. So please feel free to check that out as well, and let me know if you've got any questions.
Yeah, and to add to that, Dr. Kimberley does the hormonal testing and the food sensitivity testing. And these are things that you want to get a baseline on. All of us need to do this as we continue to age. I would suggest that we do a baseline maybe every 2 to 5 years at the latest to see where we're at, because things are constantly changing. And especially as we move into midlife and later, things start to, and as more and more stress keeps coming up for us in this world we're in, there's more and more impact and imbalance that's going to happen. So please use her as a resource. She's got everything you need to get some great background information set through some testing and then some diagnostics, and she can explain things really well from a place where it can be very confusing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Kimberley. Really appreciate it. We've got a couple questions here, and then anyone else, if you have questions that haven't been answered yet, please interject. Please put those in the chats. We'll take probably 5 to maybe 10 minutes right now to get those answered. Dr. Kimberley, the first one, and sort of in line with what you were just talking about with working with a naturopathic doctor, is doing blood tests the best way for diagnosing hypo or hyperthyroidism?
Yeah, great question. So it depends. For thyroid specifically, in my local practice, most often I look at blood testing, and that's really the main way that we want to look at hormone levels. Sometimes I also do additional urine-based testing, which I do quite often at Mountain Trek, that is looking at some heavy metals and nutrient levels that can also impact thyroid function. So there can be things we look at on top of that, but blood is the best way generally to look at thyroid. When it comes to adrenal hormones and sex hormones, so estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, all of those I look at through urine-based hormone testing. And that way we see metabolites and we get way more information than what we do for blood with those ones specifically.
If I could add to that, when we do the multiple day through the circadian day testing with urine, we can see the rise and fall of the hormones, which they naturally are supposed to do through the day. But if we just go into a lab and take a one shot of blood, we're really getting just that one time snippet from the whole day. So we don't know whether things are too high or too low, or whether they're even upside down in terms of the balance.
Definitely, which drives such a big impact. I change how I treat something 100% based on when we see cortisol high versus low, and there's a lot we can look at there.
I think the idea of going in and getting all this testing and having a kit shipped to you is a little bit overwhelming. Could you walk us through what that looks like? I know you do initial consultation and then from there you make a plan.
Yeah, exactly. So whenever I do work with a patient one-on-one, whether that's at Mountain Trek or remotely, I'm always meeting with them for an hour to start. We go through full health history, and I'm tying together all of the pieces. So you can kind of think of me like a health detective. I really look at everything as a whole, and I'm trying to figure out underlying those symptoms that might seem unrelated, what could be going on at the root of that, and then I'm directing patients and people that I'm working with in regards to what tests I think could be most useful, because there's a number of different things that I do often in the practice. The urine-based hormone testing. Do a lot of looking at digestive assessments, so stool testing or food sensitivity testing. But not everyone needs all of those things. So there's always a lot of advising, of course, from myself, and a lot of the tests are actually really easy to complete. So people get a little squeamish sometimes thinking about urine testing or stool testing, but then they do it and it's fine. So
Great. Got another question for you. Is it possible that if you're under chronic stress and the balance between estrogen and progesterone goes out of balance, can that affect your vaginal health in multiple ways, dryness, lack of desire, even as a millennial?
Yeah. So going back, so if we're talking about as a millennial, so a younger woman, and we're experiencing symptoms like that with vaginal dryness or anything that feels maybe like a low estrogen symptom, stress can affect that for sure. So we have to think our body is prioritizing when we're stressed. If we have a lot of stress going on, sexual function is not a priority. So it's going to be shutting down those systems and affecting kind of everything downstream of that. So there's glands or areas in our brain that control ovulation, it controls the thyroid function, it controls the stress hormones, and stress really impacts whether those systems are turned on or off. There's other things too. Of course, there's many other things that we can look at, but that could definitely be linked.
Great. That's all the questions that are in the chat. Does anyone else have anything before we let Dr. Kimberley go for the night? No, this is a deep topic.
It is. It's so much info.
It's a lot of information.
Also important. It's super important.
Yes, I know. I feel like I could do hours. I could do a full day seminar on this topic because there's so much more we could talk about in all of these areas. And for all of you who I will hopefully see at Mountain Trek next year too, I do a seminar that does dive into this more there as well. So many opportunities to learn. And again, I do have lots of information online. And if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out. And yeah, but I am excited. I'm really hoping we get to see everybody in person soon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kimberley, and thanks all of you for coming out, and the brave ones for asking questions, and wishing all of you the best Thanksgiving you can make for yourselves, whichever way you can connect with loved ones via Zoom or whatever way you can do it. But there's still so much to be thankful for. So all the best to all of you.